verdict and decided that they couldn't be persuaded on count one.
So when they say the terminology, and help us with the terminology so we understand this clearly, when they say they can't be persuaded, is this the same thing as a hung jury, or we just don't know? Like they feel like they've just hit a wall and can't go beyond it?
It's foreshadowing a hung jury. So it's not the judge isn't allowing them to be declared a hung jury quite yet, but this is the first step in a later hung jury. So the judge is giving them more time, encouraging them to go back and try to persuade one another, because like you said, they haven't had that much time back there together. So this is the first step, and if they come back and say, Judge, we really just can't reach a verdict on this count, he has to make a determination along with the parties as what do we do next. He probably will ask them to go back for a number of hours, likely tomorrow, if they say that they can't be persuaded this evening, and then take a verdict probably by the end of the day tomorrow if they say they can't be persuaded, or depending on what the notes say.
Okay, if you're just joining us now, we have breaking news here at the federal court in the RICO sex trafficking trial of Sean Diddy Combs. The jury late this afternoon sending a note to the court that they had reached a verdict on counts 2 through 5, which is the 2 counts of sex trafficking and 2 counts of transportation for prostitution across state lines, and that they could not reach any agreement on the RICO count. The judge we're talking about what the judge's options are right now. Both the prosecution and defense indication has been that they want the jury to go back and continue deliberating because it's only day 2. Yesterday we heard that they were having trouble with instructions. This morning they made more requests, and then this afternoon this bombshell announcement that they had reached a verdict that quickly on 2 of the 3 major charges, which contained 4 of the 5 counts that Combs was facing. So that's what's happening here. We're talking about what the possible pathways forward. Seth, let's talk about that. So if you do get a hung jury, can you have a hung jury on one of the charges?
Absolutely. So there can be a hung jury on count 1 and then take a verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then it's up to the government as to what they want to do with that charge, or whether or not they want to retry it or not retry Mr. Combs on that count. But that's absolutely possible that they could have a hung jury on 1 count and have a verdict on the other 4 counts. And as you know, we still don't know the verdict on those 4 counts.
Right, exactly.
They could be split on those counts as well. It's probably unlikely at this point, the fact that they came to a verdict at the same time on all 4 of those counts. It's probably the same verdict on each of those 4 counts. But as I said before, with a jury, you just never know.
We really don't know. And then in terms of how long they can go, if the jury says, if the judge says, you know, we want you to go back and continue deliberating, then can they continue deliberating? He told them they could if they want to, past 4 or 5 o'clock.
Yeah, and they could deliberate for another few days. It depends on the notes that they send to the judge. You know, the judge at this point told them to go back and deliberate further, and that I'm not taking a partial verdict at this point. But it could be, they could go back and they could deliberate for a day, 2 days, 3 days after you receive an instruction from the judge. It depends on what notes the jury sends to the judge at this point. They could send a note first thing tomorrow morning saying, we're never going to reach a verdict on this, and then the judge has to decide. But if he doesn't hear back from the jury any further tomorrow or the following day, well, that could also change things.
All right, and obviously the crowd is building outside the courtroom because there's a lot of buzz about this, and there have been a lot of people that are following this case very, very closely. Do you think at this point that the jury that they've gone through nearly 2 months of testimony, that they kind of already walked into those deliberations with some idea of what they would find, or is that just too much supposition for us to make at this point?
No, I think that's fair. I've spoken to a lot of jurors over my time in trying cases, and yeah, they generally have an inclination when they walk into the jury room. They do deliberate fairly, but they probably had an idea when they walked back there, and they had a fair discussion with each other about the evidence or lack thereof on the counts. And as all of the legal commentators had predicted, count 1 was always the most challenging for the government. I'm not surprised that there are jurors who have dug their heels in each direction on count 1. It was always a very aggressive charge by the government, and so I'm not surprised to hear that the jurors are having a hard time with that count.
All right, let's check in with our anchors. Bianca, Natasha, any questions from you guys?
Yeah, Lisa, without that RICO charge, how serious are the other charges, and what kind of prison time would Diddy be facing if convicted on charges 2 through 5?
Okay, I'm going to pass that on to Seth right now. So, Seth, Natasha's asking the RICO charges, aside from that, the sex trafficking, 2 counts of that, 2 counts of the transportation for prostitution. What kind of sentences would those carry if he's found guilty of those?
Well, so it's a lesser sentence than the RICO charge, but they still face heavy guidelines. Now, obviously, it's up to the judge at the end of the day, and I'm sure a sentencing would be hard fought, but I don't think we're there yet, right? We don't even even have a verdict quite yet.
Right.
There's a partial verdict, and we don't know what that verdict is. But, you know, like I said, the sentence on those charges are less than the RICO charge.
Which is could be decades.
Which could be decades. But I'm sure Mr. Combs still faces a very substantial sentence by the judge under the sentencing guidelines on those counts.
All right, Seth J. Zuckerman, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it and helping us with it. We're reporting live from federal court here where the jury sent a note saying that they had reached a partial verdict in the Sean Diddy Combs RICO sex trafficking case. We're not quite sure what's been happening the last couple of minutes because we've been out here trying to get the word out, but we'll find out and we'll get back to you with more as this story develops. But I'm going to send it back to the studio to Bianca and Natasha right now. Back to you guys.
All right, thank you so much for that. As Lisa Evers on the ground outside of this courthouse right now as they're continuing to learn what this exactly means. We do have multiple angles of this scene there as a partial verdict has been reached. Let's bring to the conversation right now, friend of the program, former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani. Nima, thank you so much for joining us. We do know that the note was passed to the judge that they have a verdict on count 2, 3, 4, and 5, not the RICO, the racketeering case. What do you make of what just happened?
Obviously big news, and generally news like this in a complex federal case that could go either way is bad news for the prosecution. Now let's go through the counts. Counts 3 and 5, those are prostitution. Those were always the most readily provable counts. So it's certainly possible that the jurors are not guilty across the board. I would be surprised if we got not guilties on the prostitution because the defense's argument is that Combs didn't know that these were escorts and he was hiring porn stars to make a homemade porno. Not a particularly good argument, in my opinion. Now, that being said, if that's all the government gets, this will be a huge loss for the Department of Justice. This will go down as the most expensive prostitution trial in American history. So then you're looking at counts 2 and 4. Count 2 is sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura. Count 4 is sex trafficking of victim Jane. Those were the harder crimes to prove, in my opinion. So I would be surprised if the jurors were guilty on sex trafficking, but had hung on RICO or racketeering. It's certainly possible, but one of the major components of racketeering is a racketeering act. And we've talked about them. It could be drug trafficking, sex trafficking, can be extortion, can be obstruction, can be bribery, can be arson. But in many ways, because there's different paths to get there, racketeering is an easier charge to prove. So, you know, looking at the possibilities, not guilty across the board is certainly a possibility, although unlikely given the prostitution. Guilty across the board, possible. But again, if they've reached a guilty verdict on sex trafficking and prostitution, they're probably well on their way to guilty on racketeering as well. So what we may be seeing right now, Andy, is a split verdict, not just a partial verdict, a split verdict where we have guilty on the least serious charges, counts 3 and 5, prostitution, also called the Mann Act. We have not guilty on sex trafficking, counts 2 and 4, in which case this entire trial is going to come down to racketeering. Either the jurors will get it together and they'll reach a verdict, in which case it'll completely make or break this trial. If the government gets racketeering and prostitution, I think they'll consider that a win. Combs will likely get double-digit years in federal prison. If they get not guilty on racketeering and sex trafficking and just prostitution, we're looking at little to no time, maybe even time served. So that top count is going to be everything. The judge read an instruction, told them to continue deliberating. Hasn't read that Allen charge yet. We know what that is. But I think we'll see today and potentially tomorrow. It's going to decide Combs' future.
Yeah, that is a very good way to explain it because the RICO, the top charge in this is so very important. And you kind of dissected the partial jury verdict. We'll see if it is that split verdict, as you mentioned. Let's get into the Allen charge because the prosecution pushing for this to trying to find a consensus. How often does that happen in a courtroom?
It's very common. Before a judge instructs a jury and discharges them, they give one last effort. And this is a famous Supreme Court case, aptly called Allen. And there's an instruction that, tells jurors of their duty to deliberate, to keep an open mind, to listen to their fellow jurors, hoping that continued deliberations will reach a verdict. Because if the jury mistrials on count 1, then potentially the government can go through this whole process all over and just charge Combs with racketeering. And obviously, that's not going to be a good use of anyone's time. If the jurors, with a few more hours or even a day or two, can get a verdict on that top count, that's going to be in everyone's best interest. But of course, the defense prefers a mistrial and not guilty on sex trafficking, hoping the government won't retry this case.
And I want to ask you, because if they push them back to deliberate more, and no matter how long that goes, if it's just a few hours, a few days, can they talk about the other charges? Are those now counts 2, 3, 4, and 5? Are they off the table completely?
They're not. The judge is going to take one verdict form completed. He's not going to take a partial verdict. They're not going to come and say, okay, well, we're guilty of prostitution or not guilty. It's really an all or nothing situation. Now, of course, the jurors can say, we are hopelessly deadlocked on count 1, but we have reached a verdict on counts 2 through 4, in which case the judge will take that verdict. And potentially the judge, it's certainly within his discretion. He can even dismiss count 1. We know that Rule 29 motion is still pending. The judge was going to wait until after the jurors returned a verdict. That's, of course, the motion for acquittal that the defense made. So that's certainly possible as well. But I think what would likely happen is if we do still have that split verdict going tomorrow, the jurors can't make a decision on count 1. We'll have a mistrial on count 1. Prosecution can retry the case. They may choose not to. And Combs would be sentenced, or at least held in the meantime, on whatever counts the jurors did return a guilty verdict on.
All right, this note coming back with this at least partial verdict at this point. I want to ask you about another note that the jury sent to the judge earlier on today to ask about testimony from Cassie. And her testimony came several weeks ago, more than a month ago. She was one of the first witnesses to take the stand. And of course, she is the real center point to this whole case for the prosecution. Does that tell you anything about where the jury is viewing this, or is it just a refresher of sorts?
Potentially, those were the first two witnesses to testify, amongst the first. The first was a hotel security guard, but we're talking about Daniel Phillip, who is one of the sex workers. He's the one who infamously was asked to urinate on Cassie Ventura, and obviously Cassie Ventura herself, who testified over the course of 4 days while she was very, very pregnant. That was during the first week of the trial, so maybe jurors just needed a refresher as to what happened. Obviously, she's an important witness, not just for the sex trafficking count 2 that I talked about, but some of the racketeering predicate acts. So things like the extortion, things like the drug distribution, the potential bribery for that hotel security video. So she's obviously the government's star witness. And she ties up a lot of the loose ends here, from prostitution to trafficking to racketeering. So maybe jurors wanted to hear her specific testimony with relation to either counts 2 through 4 or potentially that racketeering. They weren't very specific, so we're not going to necessarily know what they were looking for.
Yeah, you always want to kind of look into the jury room and see what they're kind of going through their minds. And I do want to get more, because we're getting some information piecemeal, piece by piece, coming out of this federal courtroom. And of course, Fox News is saying the defense wants to ask the jury at the end of the day tomorrow, rather than now, if they would want to stay over for the third day. The defense does not want the jury to feel rushed or stressed. So we could be in a position similar tomorrow. What do we make of that, and kind of what are the arguments for both prosecution and defense there?
Well, Andy, never underestimate the power of a 3-day weekend to get 12 strangers to return a verdict.
A holiday weekend, nonetheless.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously Friday is the 4th of July. Courts are closed. And if the jurors do need to continue deliberating, they have to come back next week. So the last thing the defense wants here is jurors to feel pressured. We don't know what the split is on count 1. The jurors obviously didn't say that. Is it 1 or 2 holdouts? Can they be proverbially beaten into submission in that jury deliberation room? I mean, we saw in the Harvey Weinstein case where, tempers can flare. There was even a potential physical altercation in that case. If anyone's served as a juror, it can be very frustrating. So obviously, the defense doesn't want anyone to feel that pressure of either time or a weekend or a holiday. They want the jurors to feel comfortable maintaining that position. Strong jurors, holdout jurors, those are defense jurors, jurors that just go along to get the verdict done. those are the jurors that the prosecution likes.
All right. And then, of course, we don't know exactly what the verdict entails as of yet. We could have to wait until tomorrow. But I want to ask you, because you talked about the partial verdict, the split verdict, but if there is no decision on that count number one, the racketeering, the RICO case, do you think the prosecutors will try to have another trial for this one, or do you think they will just move on entirely?
I think they're going to move on because you have a case that's about victims, right? You have Cassie and Mia and Jane who told their stories. And if the jurors didn't believe the sex trafficking, I think that Combs's conduct fits within racketeering, but it is a very broad and aggressive use of the RICO statute. It's primarily used for the mob or organized crime, street gangs, drug cartels. If indeed the sexual contact was consensual, then I don't think the government should prosecute this case. They should accept the jury verdict. And if they were unable to get convictions, whether it's a mistrial or whether it's a straight acquittal on the most serious counts, and all they have is prostitution, kind of reminds me of the Karen Reed case. She's charged with murder and then manslaughter, and they ultimately convicted her of just operating a vehicle while under the influence of alcohol. If you're a prosecutor, you're supposed to really pursue justice and not go after wins, and they should accept the loss and move on. The jury has spoken.
Yeah, and similar to the Karen Reed case, the verdict, it came back and then it went back. So we're in a similar scenario with this high-profile case as well. All right, Neema, I know you got to go, so thank you again for your insight here on Live Now from Fox.
Thanks, Sandy. Talk to you soon.
All right, thank you so much. All right, great conversation there about all of the latest. Another live picture right now is the jury has reached a partial verdict in this Diddy trial. We're learning more from inside of the courtroom as the jury will be reread a section of the jury charge to emphasize that they must read a verdict. The judge is asking now if the parties would be okay with meeting again on Thursday, the 3rd, if necessary. The defense wants to ask the jury at the end of the day tomorrow, rather than now, if they would want to stay over for another day. The defense doesn't want the jurors to feel stressed or rushed. Neither defense or prosecution objects to meeting on the July 3rd date. Of course, talking about that, a holiday weekend upcoming. And we're also learning that the jury has re-entered the courtroom. The judge will address their note and remind them that they can send a note when they're finished for the day, saying, quote, "I received your note that you have reached verdicts on counts 2 through 5, but not on count 1. I ask this time that you keep deliberating." So they are going to back into that jury room to learn more about this here. So you're just seeing a rainy day in New York City as we're following the very latest. And I want to continue to talk about some of these charges because count number 1, that racketeering case, has the most consequences for it in terms of jail time, potentially for this music mogul. I want to put this up here on Live Now from Fox and just read them out to you because we're talking about count number 1. That's the RICO, the racketeering conspiracy. Count 2 is sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. That in relation to Cassie Ventura. Of course, we were watching a lot about that as the jury also asking about testimony from her, the ex-girlfriend, during their relationship in the early 2010s as they talked about the Intercontinental Hotel, that piece of video coming out as they were arguing about it being domestic abuse versus sex trafficking. Count 3 is transportation to engage in prostitution. Count 4, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. This relating to the individual that they called Jane that didn't want to be identified as they're facing that sex trafficking count for the ex-girlfriend accused of coercing her into freak-off parties through similar methods, carries a 15-year life sentence. And also that 5th count, the transportation to engage in prostitution. So those are the 5 counts that the jury was really tasked with finding a verdict on. They appear to have at least a verdict right now on 2 through 5. So not the most important one, not the most damaging one in terms of the racketeering, the RICO case. But we're still following this very closely. A live picture there outside of the courtroom as the judge telling the jury to keep deliberating in this case. He mentioned that the Allen charge, the really genesis behind this, to ask them to try to find at least a consensus one way or another. And that is also at the center of this. The jury has apparently found a verdict, at least a partial verdict. We don't know which way it goes. You heard there from Nima Rahmani, friend of the program, former federal prosecutor, that it could be necessarily split in terms of several of these counts. They found not guilty, several of them finding guilty. The most important one, though, count number one. So we're just going to watch this here. Let's just pull up the audio a little bit and listen into what's going on, because as you imagine, as this news is filtering through social media and the airwaves, people are heading down to this courtroom to see a verdict in person. Let's just listen in briefly here to some of the moments on the ground in the Big Apple. All right, you're just listening into this here on Live Now from Fox. The jury reaching this partial verdict in this Diddy trial. And although a verdict has been reached on counts 2 through 5, deliberations will resume once more on Wednesday. And we will not know exactly what that verdict was, if it was all-encompassing, all guilty, not guilty, or a split verdict in terms of those 2, 3, 4, 5 charges as they are going home for the day. The jury is. They will continue tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. So that is a major development in terms of this case. And like you heard there from Nima Rahmani, they will go back in the jury room and they will continue to deliberate. And counts 2, 3, 4, and 5 still very much on the table in terms of deliberation. They will simply present one jury form, one verdict form to the judge. So those counts still very much up in the air, not solidified, guilty or not guilty, depending on what we're looking at. All right, let's just continue to listen in here. A rainy day, but we'll see if we have anybody stepping out of the courtroom to make some comments. Let's just listen in here to this scene on Live Now. All right, just listening in there as we're following this, kind of dissecting what this all means. And we do have this other angle. You can see there, this is the area where the supporters of Sean Diddy on a daily basis, as this has been going on for almost 2 months now. It was 34 different witnesses on the stand, including Cassie Ventura. without first trying to decide the remaining count. He said the jurors have a right to deliver a partial verdict, but indicated that it's more of a last resort and that given the short amount of time the panel has been deliberating, he'd rather give them more time and wait for a full verdict. So again, we're just following it here on Live Now from Fox. Some people, maybe reporters, walking out of the courtroom right now as they are the ones delivering all of this information. We do know that there are no cameras inside of the courtroom, so just simply sketches and information, verbatim words and different quotes that we're getting from all of the testimony of these incidents that took place, these alleged incidents on the ground. And of course, I do want to put up just some of these, again, just these charges that we saw as I want to read them out to you again here in full, talking about these, the counts against the music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. The count one, that racketeering RICO conspiracy, that's the top count. And then sex trafficking, 2 cases of that, 2 and 4. 1 for victim number 1, Cassie Ventura, the ex-girlfriend, and also Jane, the ex-girlfriend referred to as Jane, accused of coercing her into freak-off parties through similar methods, and also you can see there transportation for prostitution. So just several of the counts, and I want to continue to reiterate that because it's an interesting component, a very important component, because you heard from Nima Rahmani that if they cannot come to a verdict on count number 1, if they acquit Sean Diddy Combs on count number 1, it will be a significantly lesser time served, jail time potential for counts 2 through 4, even if all of those come back as guilty. So still watching this here on Live Now from Fox. Let's just bring up some of the audio and hear what's going on right now on the ground as we're watching and waiting potentially family members for Diddy, for other members of media to go to it. Actually, let's go out right now as we're following it. Lisa Evers on the ground outside of the courthouse giving another report. Let's listen into this.
Deliberating, not happy at all that they did not, that they reached this partial verdict and not on the other charge. Said you need to continue deliberating. He said tomorrow morning when the jury returns, instead of going into the courtroom and having the kind of procedural things that they usually do at the start of the day before they're sent to the jury deliberations room, he said you go straight to the jury deliberations room. Now, if this is the first that you're hearing of this and you're joining us right now here on Fox 5 and on Fox 5 digital affiliates, the most important thing to understand is about almost an hour ago at this point, the jury sent a note to the court that they had reached a verdict on 4 of the 5 charges that Diddy is facing in this case. The notes were passed, discussions were held, the defense and the prosecution both saying that they wanted the jury to continue deliberating. Now, the charge that they were unpersuadable about, that was a term that was used and divided on, was that most important number 1 charge, the RICO, the racketeering charge, that if Combs was found guilty of that, would send him away for possibly decades, if not life. So they'll be back again tomorrow morning to continue the deliberations. Tomorrow is only day 3 of these deliberations. Now, we have some experts with us right now here to try to break this all down. Joining me is Faye Honig. She's a consultant. She's also president of the American Society of Trial Consultants. Faye, thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Also with us is criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Seth J. Zuckerman. Seth, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
Seth, in terms of where things stand now, the judge telling them go back and go home, come back, don't talk to anybody, go straight to don't pass go straight to the jury deliberation room tomorrow morning. What do you make of this, of what is happening here?
So this is fairly common. So at this point, the jury has indicated to the judge and the parties that they've reached a verdict on 4 of the 5 counts and that they are hung on count 1, which is the most serious count, the RICO racketeering count. Obviously, the jury and the public have not learned, the judge and the public have not learned what that verdict is quite yet. So we're waiting to hear what the verdict is on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5, and the judge is asking them to deliberate further on count 1. Now, he sent them back to the jury room this evening to deliberate further, but they sent a note asking to go home, and he has sent them home and said to come back tomorrow morning and continue your deliberations as soon as you get back to court tomorrow. And I expect that there'll be a note fairly fairly quickly from the jury, one way or another, whether that they're still hung on count one or have a readback.
You mean tomorrow? You think?
Tomorrow, yeah.
Right.
I expect that they'll deliberate and then have a note fairly quickly about which way the jury is going on count one.
And Faye, you've consulted on many big trials and these federal trials. What about this partial verdict and this coming so soon? Like, this is only day 2 of deliberations. How unusual is that?
I mean, you honestly never really know how a trial is going to go. These jurors have clearly been paying attention. They've asked numerous questions. The first question came pretty quickly yesterday. It was almost about an hour in. So you never really know how it's going to be, and each trial is different. But we've seen these partial verdicts before. We just saw it happen in Weinstein. We kind of always knew that the number 1 charge is going to be the most complicated one. So it's not that surprising that, like you said, that's the one they're hung up on.
And then in terms of their options when they go back, do they have to redecide these charges, these counts that they already said they reached a verdict on, or do they just focus right on that one RICO charge?
The entire deliberations now is on count 1. Counts 2, 3, 4, and 5 have a verdict, and they will give that verdict to the court at the appropriate time. But right now, the entire deliberation is for count 1 on the RICO racketeering charge, and they will give any further notes to the court as to where they're going with their verdict when they come back tomorrow.
And then,
or if they even reach a verdict, of course.
Right, if they reach a verdict
they may
tomorrow.
be hung on count 1.
But that's the one thing that they have. And then, Seth, in terms of if it's a hung jury, or if they come back and say, end of tomorrow, we can't come to any agreement on this, what happens then?
So the judge did not give an Allen charge, which is what's known as a charge that you give to a jury when they indicate that they're hung and that they need more time to deliberate. And the judge gives them, basically tells them that they need to work together, try to persuade one another to come to a verdict, that he doesn't want it to be a hung jury. So he did not give them an Allen charge quite yet. What he did is he gently told them that they needed to work better together. It was short of an Allen charge, as we call it, but I anticipate if there's a note tomorrow telling the court that there is no verdict and that they are still hung, I imagine that there'll be a formal Allen charge at some point tomorrow.
And Faye, this jury, they're very diverse backgrounds, very diverse, a lot of diversity, different types of backgrounds, different educational levels. Does that present an element of complexity when they're trying to deliberate and come to agreement?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is what I was saying weeks ago, right? Like, it doesn't even matter who the individual person is, but it also matters about group dynamics. So this jury is very diverse, and we're seeing that in deliberations. We already saw a note about one juror that they were concerned couldn't follow the instructions. They're now, clearly hung up on these charges. There's clearly a group, or at least one person in there, that is vehemently against the other side. So the group dynamics really are making this a very interesting deliberation.
And then, Seth, in terms of just the tensions and the pressures on the attorneys, like at this point, if you're put your prosecutor hat on, if you're the prosecutors, what are you worried about?
The prosecutors are worried that they have a hung jury on count 1. It was obviously always an aggressive charge that a lot of us in the legal community thought was a little too far.
A bridge too far.
Correct. And they're worried that the jury has indicated that they have jurors on each side who have dug their heels in and are not willing to reach a verdict because they feel strongly one way or the other about their position. So I think as a prosecutor, you're concerned about that, but you also know that you've got a verdict on 4 of the counts. They obviously don't know what the verdict is yet, but I think the prosecutors feel pretty comfortable about the 4 other counts, but they don't feel comfortable about the RICO racketeering count.
And then, Faye, what about the fact that they reached an agreement on these 4 counts so quickly? Is there any prevailing wisdom or conventional wisdom in the jury and trial consultant community that says if it's that fast, it may indicate one thing or the other?
I'm sure both sides kind of have their view. It's kind of difficult to guess what the jury's thinking. Like I said, the only insight we really have are the juror notes that they're bringing to the court. So I don't want to make an educated guess,
right.
But I feel like a lot of us have a thought about which way it's going to go.
Which way it's going to go. Seth, what about that? If you're the defense attorneys and you're hearing that there's a verdict on 4 of the 5 this quickly, what are you thinking?
I mean, I think it's really hard as a defense attorney to know that there's a verdict on 4 of the 5 counts and not learn what it is. They all have to go to sleep tonight and wake up tomorrow morning without learning what the verdict is. And as a defense attorney, that's really hard because you don't know. It's out of your control, and you don't know what that verdict is. So I don't think that they feel great tonight, knowing that there is a partial verdict on those 4 counts, and they don't know what that verdict is.
And maybe a lot of sleepless nights on both sides. I want to thank both of you for being with us, trial consultant Faye Honig and criminal defense attorney Seth J. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
People are going a little